Welcome in to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops. If you love fishing, hunting, and the great outdoors and want to make it even better, you're in the right place. With host Rob Keck, your adventure starts right here.
Good morning and welcome, and thanks for tuning into Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops, where truly your adventure starts right here. I'm Rob Keck, your host, and hey, what a great show we have for you today, and happy November the 2nd. I can't believe it's the 11th month of the year, and you know, the beauty of the fall season's upon us. Cooler temperatures, leaves have fallen way up north, and continue that color change right through this month. And out west they've lost leaves, but it's still turning colors here in the south. It's really pretty, and for many of us it's prime time hunting season. Yet for others, it's time to wet a line for some fabulous fall fishing. It's time for giving thanks and time for the anticipation of our celebration of the coming Christmas season. It's a time for families to gather in hunting camps, gather around the Thanksgiving turkey, and just simply sit next to the fireplace. It's my favorite time of year. I love the smell, the chill, the thrill, and all that's yet to come. On today's show, we're going to talk about hunting, fishing, and some very important conservation work being done to preserve our time-honored traditions by the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and its president and CEO, Whit Fosburgh. But before we meet today's guest, I just want to remind you that in 9 days, November 11th, it's Veterans Day, and it's an important day to remembering those brave men and women, veterans of our military, served both during wartime and peace, that have sacrificed for our precious freedoms that we enjoy right here in the United States of America. And as we know, freedom's not free, and freedom has come at a very high price of the lives of so many. Freedom is the envy of so many around the world. And Bass Pro Shops, we salute our military veterans, and we've got a 10% military discount that's available starting right there on Veterans Day, running through the 22nd, available to all active duty and retired military personnel. Just show your valid military photo ID and check out and receive that 10% discount. We salute you. And well, here for the first segment of our show, as we begin every month, bring us more about the many fun activities happening at Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, our communications manager, Katie Mitchell. Katie, happy November, and it's time to stoke up the fireplace.
Boy, it really is here today in Springfield, Missouri, let me tell you. But, speaking of family and fun and Christmas coming and everything, now that Halloween's passed, it is time to talk about Christmas. It's fair game.
I know it.
As usual, here we come back again for the 11th season now. Our really crazy popular Santa's Wonderlands returning to Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's across the nation. The jolly old elf is going to arrive at all Bass Pro and Cabela's stores Saturday, November the 16th, beginning at 5 p.m. And, of course, all the fun and free activities, crafts, games, free photos with Santa, you can get them right there at your Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's through Tuesday, December the 24th. Kids can come write a letter telling Santa what they want, play games, remote-controlled trucks, laser foam arcades, Lincoln Logs, always a favorite. It's that time of year.
Hey, NASCAR, man, are we ever happy about Martin Truex in that Final Four? Tell us what's happening this weekend.
Absolutely. Well, this weekend we're going to Texas, where everything's bigger and better in Texas. But, yeah, Martin doesn't need to worry. He's already punched his ticket to be in the Final Four at Homestead. He's won his third playoff race. That's just crazy. He's really on fire, and we wish him the best at Texas Motor Speedway this weekend.
Yep. Outdoor Adventures. Boy, we've got something new here, nationwide program. Why don't you tell us about how we're getting youth outdoors here in this final little bit of time?
If you know anything about Bass Pro Shops and our founder, Johnny Morris, you know that this is his passion, getting kids in the outdoors, getting everybody in the outdoors, but you got to start them early. We're very excited. This is a brand new program. It launches today, November the 2nd, at 10 a.m. over there at our store in the Houston area. It's going to be at our Pearland location, but that's just the first of many to come. It's called the Outdoor Adventures Program, and we're partnering up with local YMCAs in the area, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Bass Pro Shops, and we're kicking off this program to try getting kids, urban kids, don't often get a chance to get in the outdoors, but they're going to be able to come to either the YMCA this Saturday. Today, they can go to Bass Pro Shops, and they're going to be able to try their hand at archery and setting up a tent and a campfire and see what's all involved in nature hiking and even do some fishing. It's all this grand effort that we're putting out. We hope to get 13 stores open the next 3 years with this program. It's part of the after school program, so be looking for that to come to your area. Starts this today at Houston at the Pearland location at 10 a.m. Come join kids from the West Orem YMCA along with the National Wildlife Federation and Bass Pro, and let's get those kids outdoors to create the future generation of conservation stewards.
Wow, exciting, Katie. It's so important that we get these people outdoors to connect with nature, to get their fingers into the dirt. Well, look, thanks so much. Great job as always. I'm so excited for you. Thanksgiving coming up. I hope you have one of the best ever. Well, folks, that's going to take us to our first break. We return, going to introduce our next guest for the rest of the show, the president and CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Whit Fosburgh. This and a whole lot more coming right up. And I'm Rob Keck, your host, right here on Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, only on Rural Radio Sirius 147.
We'll be back in a moment to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM. Back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM.
And welcome back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio. And if you've just tuned in, we're introducing our next guest. We're going to be visiting with Whit Fosburgh and talk about the organization he leads as the president and CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Well, first, I went to the website of the organization, and I was really impressed with what it said. It said, we help create federal policy and funding solutions by uniting our partners and amplifying the voices of the American sportsmen and women in service of Theodore Roosevelt's conservation legacy. While in the political arena, he succeeded in making conservation a top-tier national issue. Well, TR had the foresight to address these issues still so significant to sportsmen and women today, and understanding that if we want to safeguard critical habitat, productive hunting grounds, and our favorite fishing holes for future generations, we must plan carefully today. And here to share with us the work of this important organization is the president and CEO, my good friend, Whit Fosburgh. Whit, welcome to Outdoor World Radio.
Rob, it's great to be with you again.
Well, I've got to ask you, Roosevelt's words back in 1912, that there can be no greater issue than that of conservation in this country. Does it ring as true today as it did back then?
Well, I think, certainly for me it does. And I think for the country it does, even if folks don't quite recognize it. I mean, you think about our sporting traditions are really part of what makes America great. The North American model of wildlife conservation, is the envy of the world. You think about where we were back in Theodore Roosevelt's time, white-tailed deer were almost gone, bear were almost gone, elk were almost gone, buffalo essentially were gone, turkeys were gone. When under Roosevelt's vision, we created a system in this country that not only brought those species back and created the modern hunting and fishing culture that we have and the great outdoor recreation economy, but it also, provided everybody else with clean air, clean water, healthy outdoor lifestyle. The problem is that, as we've gotten more urban as a society, people get less connected to the lands. I've got kids. It's harder to get them to, get outside and to pay attention. And then we have our lawmakers too, which used to be largely, rural or semi-rural, now are largely urban. And so we've lost that connection. And so that's where I think we see some of that slippage in terms of people not quite recognizing how important this is to the country and how ingrained with our traditions it is and how ingrained with our economy it is.
Yeah, you're spot on. Well, in your opinion, do you think we can ever get it elevated back to that level that Roosevelt made it as a top tier? And if so, how would we do it?
Yeah, I think we can. And I think that, listen, we're not facing the crisis that we faced back then that Roosevelt saw and invest. In a lot of ways, we've become complacent. I mean, everybody alive today has had the benefit of enjoying public lands. We've had plentiful game populations for most of people's lives. We've got clean air. We've got clean water. Not many people remember the Cuyahoga River on fire back in the 1970s. And, so there's not that threat. People don't understand how much effort went to get us to where we are today, and they've again become complacent. So that when that happens, we invite backsliding. We invite people to come out with notions about getting rid of our public lands, about weakening our environmental laws. We invite the PETAs of the world to come forward because people don't understand how important hunting is, for example, in wildlife management. So I think that to get back to where we were, we have to engage. We have to make our voices heard again, and we can't become complacent. We need to set aside our petty arguments. If you're a fly fisherman, a fin fisherman, a bow hunter, a rifle hunter, put that aside and focus on the big picture and regain that voice that we had for much of the 20th century.
Well, that's why organizations like TRCP are so important. Well, we're going to just slide off of that for the moment. And I just want to tell you, it's great to have you on the show. And I must ask, have you been hunting or fishing this fall? And if you have, I want to know, where have you been and what have you hunted and fished for?
All right. So the hunting starts week of Veterans Day. And we have deer camp up in the Adirondacks. And that's the official beginning of my hunting season. And that's been a tradition in our family literally since the 1800s. Fishing, I hit Montauk at the end of east end of Long Island this time of year in the fall, October. All the bait fish are there, all the predators come together, and it's just mayhem. I love it. I try to hit that every year. Last week, I was out in Colorado doing a little late season fly fishing, which was phenomenal. But now, pretty much, beginning right now, the focus turns to hunting for the majority of the winter, and then shifts back to fishing come the spring.
You mentioned about a tradition there in the Adirondacks with deer camp. Tell me just a little bit about that. That is of great interest to me because in so many places we've lost traditions. Tell us about the one that you're part of.
So this is we have a little club up there. It was created in the 1880s, and at that time, the Adirondacks were kind of a mess, and it was really the first real effort to create a large-scale public lands because they'd been clear-cut. There were fires. It was affecting water quality all the way down to New York City, Albany, Troy. And so the state legislature created essentially a forever wild, around a 6 million acre swath in the Adirondacks. And around that time, a bunch of private clubs were created too. So you have this mix, about 3 million acres of public lands, 3 million acres of private lands. And our place has not changed a whole lot since the 1880s, other than the fact we do have running water and electricity now, which is really good. But we're, super remote out there. Anybody who's hunted the Adirondacks knows there's, real low deer densities. So we may go a whole week and never see a buck, and that's fine. But it's that tradition. It's getting together with my brother, with a couple of buddies, 4 buddies, in fact. And, we, talk hunting. We spend all day in the woods. We cook for each other. We probably drink a little bit too much. But it's just a phenomenal tradition.
That is great. Well, look, we just have a minute here before we take our next break. But what is it about hunting and fishing that's important to you?
Well, I think 2 things. I mean, one, I love the challenge. I love getting out there in beautiful places and matching wits with animals. And that may be stalking a buck, or it may be trying to convince a trout to take something they think might be a mayfly. So, I mean, that's part of it. The other part is, that is the getting together. It's the social aspect. That 1 week a year for deer camp that we set aside everything else, that I turn off my phone, that I put in that out of office message on my emails, and we just have a great time for a week that rejuvenates us literally for the next year. So I think it's both of those things, the challenge as well as the camaraderie.
Yeah. Well, many people are getting ready for deer camps. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But, Whit, we're going to take our next break. When we return, we're going to continue this visit. We got a lot more coming right up. And I'm Rob Keck, your host, right here in Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, only on Roll Radio, Sirius 147. Thanks for joining us, and we will be right back.
We'll be back in a moment to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM. Back back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM.
And welcome back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio Sirius 147. Thanks for joining us, and if you've just tuned in, we're privileged to have with us the President and CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Whit Fosburgh. You know, Whit, we were talking about traditions. We were talking about the passion that you have, and you know, where did that passion for hunting and fishing begin? It had to be sparked someplace, somewhere. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was lucky. I didn't know I was lucky at the time, but I grew up in the woods in upstate New York. My dad worked for the conservation department. He was a big, hunter, angler. We lived a couple miles back on a dirt road. We didn't have any neighbors, but we had a lot of woods. We had a trout stream that ran through our property. And so my little brother and I, literally from the time we were pretty much walking on, we're out, fiddling around in the woods. And then we had fly rods. Typically those first many years, there was a worm on the end of the fly rod, but it worked just fine. But we really, learned to, enjoy that as a fundamental part of life. That's what we did. That's how we entertained ourselves. We didn't really have TV reception. So, and there was no such thing as an Xbox or Nintendo. So what we were doing is we were out, making forts in the woods, and eventually then fishing, and moved to hunting after that. And so it became pretty ingrained in what we do. My brother works for the Park Service now. So he too followed that sort of, early, passion we have for just being outside and, being in nature.
Well, there's no doubt that with us moving to a more urban society, that many kids don't have that same opportunity like you and like I had of being able to explore the outdoors in a way that I know when I left after breakfast, Mom said, make sure you're back by dinner time. And, we took it upon ourselves to, develop that fun, whether it was turning rocks in a stream or climbing a tree or, taking our BB guns out. And, it was just something that, was part of growing up. And we're so challenged today. And I'm sure like you or like me, you had some early mentors and mentors that meant a lot to you as you were growing into the career that you're into today. Who were some of those early mentors and how did they impact you?
My dad passed away when I was relatively young. I was in high school, early high school. But he and his brother, Uncle Hugh, were big outdoorsmen. They were pretty well known in the community, from the hunting and fishing world. My dad started the conservation magazine in New York State. Hugh wrote a book about, the wild places. And it eventually became sort of expert on the Adirondacks. And, so they both passed away by the time we were sort of figuring this stuff out. So, I'd say there were mentors in concept, but really what we did was we got every issue of Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, Sports Afield, Fly Fisherman, and we digested every single word. And then we went out there and we sort of taught ourselves to learn. And it's not, so we didn't have those traditional early mentors. I think a lot of kids might. But we had enough ingrained in our family and where we lived, and our mom was super supportive of it. I mean, she didn't really hunt or fish herself, but she was more than happy to, clean the pile of pike we'd bring home, stuff like that. And, for a while at least. So I think that, it was, her willingness to sort of let us do that kind of stuff and encourage it. And then, the fact that we were able to access those resources in largely magazine form at that time, was huge for us.
Yeah. I can't tell you how much I look forward to getting Fur Fishing Game, Pennsylvania Game News, and other magazines which you've just mentioned. They had an impact on me as well. Well, what do you like better, hunting or fishing?
It depends on the season. So right now, hunting, because I'm getting fired up for deer camp. When that hatches on the upper Delaware and I'm chasing big rainbows, it'll be fishing that day. Yeah. I mean, that's the cool thing about this stuff. I mean, when you're in the moment, it's the greatest thing ever. And that could be I'm in a turkey hunt or I'm in South Dakota pheasant field, and I just can't imagine it getting any better than that. So I just think that's the thing I love about it is there's so much diversity. In hunting and fishing, you can always be doing something different, or if it's something you just love, you do the same thing and never gets old.
Yeah.
I think that probably I'm most passionate about that week of deer camp. But after that, listen, it's all awesome.
Yeah. Well, look, we talk about how you and I both grew up having a chance to to check out and be engaged in the outdoors in rural America. But today, with this urbanized society, looking at recruitment, then retention, reactivation, are we making any progress on R3, looking at all three of those?
Yeah, so just for your listeners who don't know what R3 is, I mean, that's, basically recruitment, retention, and reactivation. And that's essentially what keeps hunting and fishing alive in this country. And we've had some pretty disturbing trends on the hunting side of, decreased participation. Fishing side is going great. Actually, we had a dip for a while, and now it's back up. And I really think the fishing community broadly has got its act together. There's something called the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, which spends several $1 million a year in sort of advertising boating and fishing. A lot of folks have seen the Take Me Fishing campaign, the Take Me Boating campaign. There's a Hispanic part of that, the Vamos a Pescar campaign. And together, those have really reversed that decline, and we're seeing a whole bunch of new growth in the fishing side. And largely, it's folks that don't look like us, Rob. I mean, it's Hispanic, it's women, it's young folks. And that's been super encouraging. The problem is on the hunting side is we don't have something like the Recreational Boating Foundation because, the way the laws are set up, the Pittman-Robertson law, which is the excise tax on hunting and hunting equipment, including, guns, ammo, archery equipment, that pays for conservation largely. But back in the 1930s, when that was passed, nobody thought we would actually go out and have to recruit new hunters. I mean, everybody was hunting.
Sure.
And so you can't use those funds for recruitment. Now, when the fishing side, the Dingell-Johnson, Act, that was all the fishing excise taxes. They specifically allow a portion of that to be used for recruitment and engagement of the next generation. Now, we're trying to get that law changed in Congress right now to allow the hunting side to actually go out and market hunting, which I think is going to be necessary to reverse that decline. And we went from about 13 million hunters and 5 years ago to around closer to 11.5 million today. That is a significant decline, and we need to get that reversed, not only because we want people out there hunting, but that pays for conservation in America. And if we have people going away from the sport, that directly impacts the quality of our lands, the quality of our wildlife, and the quality of our experiences out.
Yep, for sure. Well, look, when we get back from this break, I want you to talk about how you got engaged in the work that you're dealing with, your career path to where you are now. So we're going to move to this break. We've got a lot more to talk about right here in Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, only on Roll Radio Sirius 147. Thanks for joining us, and we will be right back.
We'll be back in a moment to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM. Back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM.
And welcome back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here in Rural Radio. And we want to pick up where we left off with the president, the CEO of TRCP, Mr. Whit Fosburgh. Whit, you've been in the conservation arena for quite a long time. And, so often I get questions, I'm sure you do, from young people, maybe college-age people, or maybe people looking for career changes on how'd you get involved. And so I'm going to throw that out to you to ask if you would share how you got engaged in this work, in the conservation arena, and the career path that took you to where you work right now.
Yes, it's a good question because, it was not the path I had originally pursued. I went to, I have to say, grew up in the woods, and I knew a fair bit about, just from a practical standpoint, forests and wildlife. But then went to college in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown, and was in government international relations major. And basically got to the end of 4 years of college and recognized I probably still knew more about wildlife and, the woods than I did about geopolitics. I loved the government aspect of it, and so I decided to try to marry those, those two parts of it, that interest in government, politics, and history, with knowledge of wildlife and forests and everything else. And so, my first job out of college was the National Audubon Society, and doing writing for them and lobbying, and then figured I need a little bit of formal education in that, just so I sort of, whatever I took with me from growing up in the woods was probably not enough to actually build a career around that. So I went and got a master's degree in environmental studies at the forestry school. and then came back, worked on the Hill for about 5 years, doing energy and environment policy. Went to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, ran their fisheries program, went to Trout Unlimited for 15 years, running all their development side, but also a lot of the conservation work. And then came over here to TRCP in 2010, and it's been great. And I've been lucky to be able to marry my avocation with my vocation. And in terms of advice I give people is if you're passionate about it and you can make it work, go for it. Because if again, I don't consider myself that special, but it just things worked out, and I decided to make it work out. And you're willing to do that, and you're willing to suffer, pretty low-paying jobs to start with. Eventually, it can pay off.
Yep, for sure. Well, when we began the segment there, the second segment, I shared with our listeners what I picked up from the website in helping create federal policy and funding solutions by uniting partners and amplifying voices of the American sportsmen and women in the service of Theodore Roosevelt's conservation legacy. So why don't you take it from there? Explain TRCP, what it is, how it got started, and where you're looking to go in the future.
Yeah, so the history goes back to 2002, and a guy that you and I knew well was Jim Range. Mm-hmm. And Jim had been, Howard Baker's chief of staff. And Howard Baker was a senator from Tennessee, Republican, majority leader of the Senate back in the Reagan days. And both Jim and, Baker were big hunters and fishermen. And Jim had been, instrumental in writing a lot of the seminal environmental laws that passed in the 1970s. The Species Act, Clean Water Act, laws like that. And over time, he got really frustrated how he thought that a sensible center of the sporting community had always had been lost. He saw the environmental community move further to the left and become more democratic leaning, more litigious. He saw the gun community move further to the right, become more Republican leaning, more litigious. And he just thought that whole swath in the middle had been vacated. And so he decided to create an organization that brought all the various groups that worked on conservation together, to speak in a common voice. They were too big for any one group. Ag policy, agriculture policy, public lands policy, you name it. And part of the problem, too, was that we were a victim of our own success. I mean, Rob, you spent many years at the Turkey Federation. I mean, it does amazing work bringing turkeys back. We have the Rough Grouse Society. We have Pheasants Forever. We have Trout Unlimited. We have Bass. All those groups do great stuff. But collectively, we lost our eye on federal policy. And really, it was federal policy that was the underpinning for everything that made those groups successful. Funding through things like the Farm Bill for conservation. Policies around clean water that, make good fishing possible. I mean, you name it. It was there was a linkage to that federal side. And Jim thought that had gone away and he wanted to get it back. So today we have 60 different formal partner groups that range from the usual suspects, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Trout Unlimited, Bass, but also Outdoor Industry Association, National Marine Manufacturers. We're trying to bring that business voice into federal policy. And I think that, that's a lot of herding cats with 60 different groups in the room. And so first thing we do is agree to disagree. There are going to be certain things that, we don't agree on. We're just going to park those at the door, not worry about them. We're going to focus on what we need to. And I think that that's easier said than done, but it's worked pretty well. And the way we've really been successful is breaking all of our work down into work. So that may be, an agriculture working group that brings all the groups that really care about the Farm Bill together to work on that together. It may be a public lands working group. It may be marine fisheries. And that is really where it all gets done. So I think that, again, it's the coalition of the willing. Nobody pays dues. And all we ask is that you come in and you try your hardest to work collectively on these things and add what your group brings.
Well, there's no question that in today's world, the politics of wildlife management, the politics of conservation are trumping the good science that has brought us to these glory days, the golden years of wildlife in this country. And tell us about, just briefly, we've got about a minute and a half here before our next break, but how do you engage those partner groups to take on the politics that face the things that we love, the things we've just talked about?
Well, that's a great question. And a lot of those groups don't like to engage in those politics. It's not terribly satisfying. It can be a little bit ugly. It can be pretty acrimonious from time to time. And we're not necessarily asking. What we're asking them to do is engage and listen. If they want us to go in and lobby for them, we're happy to do it. If they want us to be the bad guy in terms of inflammatory quote in the press, we can do that. We don't want to take any group out of its comfort zone, but we also want to make it very clear that we need them to engage in whatever way they can. And listen, the part of the reason we're successful is we don't call people names. We're not going to side with Republicans. We're not going to side with Democrats. We're going to do what the resource is right for the resource. And I think as long as we keep our eye on that, we're going to be successful long.
Well said. Well, look, we're right here at a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the greatest challenges that face conservation today. And that brings us to that next break. When we return, going to continue our informative interview with Whit Fosburgh right here on Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, exclusive on Rural Radio, Sirius 147. This is Rob Keck, and we will be right back.
We'll be back in a moment to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM. Back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM.
And we are back, and thanks for tuning in to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio. And if you've just tuned in, we're privileged to have with us the president and CEO of TRCP, Whit Fosburgh. Whit, we face many challenges today in the conservation arena. If you were to pick, let's say, the top 3 or 4, what would they be? What are those greatest challenges that face conservation today?
So, that is a long, that could be a long answer. But I think there are lots of challenges. I'm going to start with the hunting side. I think chronic wasting disease is the number one threat we're facing right now. It's in 26 states, it's 100% fatal. There is no cure. There never will be a cure. You can control it if you aggressively manage it. But there's a sort of a cottage industry out there of naysayers who claim it's a hoax created by the insurance companies to reduce deer numbers. That's all nonsense. And if people become afraid of eating their venison, that is one place where we're seeing good growth in hunting today is sort of that young, folks who care about lean protein, locally sourced, non-GMO, whatever you want to talk about. But people who really have that sort of field-to-table mentality. And I think that we lose that, in hunting, and when people are afraid to eat their meat, we're in a world of hurt on that one. I would say more on the fishing side, we're starting to see much bigger issues in terms of water quality, loss of wetlands. You talk about record dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. We have huge algal blooms off east and west of Florida. We have big dead zone in the Chesapeake Bay. Again, we've gotten a little bit complacent about water quality. We're seeing a weakening of some of the wetlands laws, water quality, laws in this country. And we're also seeing a lot more people out there. Our country grows every day. And, then that's a bad combination. So I think that, that Water Quality Act is a huge deal. I'm gonna skip climate, which sort of runs over everything else. But I would just talk generally about development. I think that, we've all seen that sprawl of, urbanization. Places where you and I probably once hunted, are, parking lots now and subdivisions. That, and even we're seeing on our public lands with things like energy development, you can do it. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can, develop some areas and not impact, wildlife migrations, for example. But if you're not thoughtful about it, you have huge impacts. And we've sort of seen a rush to development of late. And we're seeing impacts from that, not just on public lands, but on private lands too. So I think the combination of, development, weakening of some of our laws and chronic wasting disease, those are 3 of the things that really keep me up at night.
Well, chronic wasting disease, it's deer season right now across deer country over many, many states. And, it's front and center. Most of the state wildlife agencies have alerts out. Hunters are becoming more and more aware of it. Transportation of deer across state lines being prohibited in many cases. Why don't you share with our listeners how you're working to stem the spread of this disease?
Well, the first thing we did was last summer, we pulled the various deer groups together, QDMA, National Deer Alliance, Elk Foundation, others, and really, sort of sequestered everybody in a room for a couple of days and developed a federal plan on what do we want to do to tackle this. And then we've signed a cooperative agreement with National Deer Alliance to essentially represent the deer community in D.C. And really, the first thing we're trying to do is get more money out to the state agencies, which are on the front lines of dealing with this, so they can actually do surveillance and testing so they know what the problem is in their individual state. Until 2011, those states got about $15 million collectively divvied up, for surveillance and testing. That money got dried up. We're getting that back in. We've got it in the House side right now. We think we're going to get it in the Senate side, or at least in conference. So that will, again, give the states the ability to know where the disease is, which is the first step to actually addressing it. Once they know where it is, then they can target certain areas, hit the deer a little bit harder. Again, hunters can be a part of the solution there. But you have a state like Illinois that's been really aggressive in dealing with it. It's kept it to background levels, less than 1%. You have a state like Wisconsin, which has been a little more schizophrenic in how it's dealt with it. It's up to 50% prevalence in a bunch of those, counties in southern Wisconsin, which are the heart of deer hunting in America. The other thing we're doing is we got money in the Farm Bill, for CWD research. We also have money going to the U.S. Geological Survey for additional research on, how it's spread. We have a National Academy of Science study that's going to be coming out in the next year or so, assuming we get this bill passed in Congress, to essentially, review the state of the science and identify what the research priorities are, and also put to bed, hopefully, this notion that this is a hoax. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now. We also have, in terms of education, we have a video on our website, trcp.org, that Steve Vernella did for us that shows really how hunters can, bone out a deer in the woods. Pretty simple thing, but a lot of hunters don't know how to do it. This walks you through step by step how to do it, because that's like you tell me before the show started, you shot a doe this morning. You're not going to take that to the taxidermist probably. And, folks will typically, if they know how to bone that out in the woods and just bring the meat back, then they're leaving the most infectious part of the animal. If there is CWD out there, not spreading it around. I mean, by definition, if you shoot an animal and you leave it where it is, and that animal is CWD positive, you're not spreading the disease by leaving that animal there because it was already there.
Yep.
But then, just if we get this money through Congress, then also there'll be a lot more testing stations out there. It'll be a lot easier for hunters to get out and get that, deer tested. Ideally, if some of this research will lead to a good live or dead test, so like a pregnancy test, ideally you go out there and you can test your deer on the spot and see if it has it or not. You don't have to butcher the whole thing, take it home, and wait for those couple of weeks till you get the results back from the state test.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I'm happy with the progress we've made in the last year on this, but we need hunters out there to be part of the solution on this and to really work with our state fish and game agencies to do the right thing.
Yep, absolutely. Well, look, we're just about out of time in this segment. We've just got a minute. We're going to start into this next question I have. Obviously, a lot of attention is paid to our great public lands, and with good reason. But, most of America is in private hands that, is where most of our hunting and fishing takes place when you look especially east of the Mississippi River. What can we do to create incentives for private landowners to conserve their lands and allow hunting and fishing? I just got about 45 seconds here. We'll take a break and we can come back to it, Whit.
Yeah, so I'll just sort of cover the subject topically, and then we'll get more detail when we come back. But, the first thing is, the Farm Bill. $5 billion for conservation on private lands, the single largest conservation program this country has. And then, and that has, a lot of implications, both in terms of water quality, in terms of hunting access. And if we can get that properly implemented, that is the single best thing we can do.
Very good. And we're going to take our final break of the show. Hold that thought. We return, going to talk more about the important work of TRCP. This and a whole lot more coming right up. And you're listening to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, only on Rural Radio, Sirius 147. This is Rob Keck, and we will be right back.
We'll be back in a moment to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM. Back to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, right here on Rural Radio on Sirius XM.
And welcome back to our final segment of Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World here in Rural Radio. We've been having a wonderful conversation and visit with the president and CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Whit Fosburgh. Whit, did you want to add anything else there on creating those incentives for private landowners? You mentioned the Farm Bill. Anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I just think that the listener need to understand just how important this is, because we think about the Farm Bill and we think about things like payments to farmers for commodities. We think about food stamps. But $5 billion for conservation is really the heart of that whole bill in my mind. And that is, you're not going to go out there and tell a landowner what they can or can't do, generally. You're going to create incentives for them to do the right thing for conservation. And particularly now with farm prices down across the country, really, this is more important than it's ever been. So to the extent that we can encourage landowners to enter some of their lands into conservation programs, like the Conservation Reserve Program, other programs like that, we can, one, add more income, on the land to the farmer, so they can stay on that land. But two, really create great habitat, make better water quality, all the rest. There's also a program in that Farm Bill, that pays landowners to open that land for public hunting and fishing. And that's where you see with the block grant program in Montana, walk-in programs in other states, that is funded through the Farm Bill as well. Again, that's an incentive, so farmer doesn't have to do it, but if they want to, they can go enter into an agreement with their state agency, get a payment for opening up that land to hunting and fishing, and also have that state assume liability. So if somebody is in there and they fall in a ditch and break their leg, the state assumes that liability, so the landowner doesn't have to worry about it. Yeah, so I think that it's great on the access side and it's great on the habitat side.
Well, looking at your website, TRCP is fighting to conserve the forage base for saltwater anglers, especially on the East Coast and in the Gulf. Why don't you talk more about this great work that you're involved with there?
So, Rob, it's a great question. It really goes back to, Bass Pro's, founder, Johnny Morris, co-chaired a panel with us a few years ago to really lay out a better vision for managing, saltwater fisheries for recreational anglers. And that was so-called Morris Deal Report, which you can find on our website, too. There were about 6 different tenets of that, most of which have been accomplished at this point, including we passed the Modern Fish Act last year. The whole idea is just to manage commercial fisheries different than recreational fisheries, because fundamentally, it could not be more different. I mean, recreational fishing, we love inefficiency. We want as many people out there having a great time and not killing all that many fish. Whereas if you're on the commercial side, it's all about efficiency, and one system fits all just did not work. Now, one of the tenets of that Morris Deal report was also we have to do a better job of maintaining that forage base if we want to have good fishing in the oceans. And for the East Coast, that's largely menhaden. It's all called bunker, called pogie in the Gulf. But it's an oily little fish that is no good to eat unless you're a marine predator. And striped bass, redfish, weakfish, bluefish, all eat menhaden. And we're trying to change how that fishery is managed. So instead of basically figuring out, there's one company that basically kills all the menhaden on the East Coast. It's called Omega Protein. It's owned by a Canadian company called Cook Industries, and they catch 70 give or take % of all the menhaden every single year, grind them up into fish food and oil, ship them to Canada to feed aquaculture salmon, which is also totally unsustainable. And we're trying to get that fishery managed differently. So instead of how many fish can you kill before you drive that stock extinct, let's think about the other way. What does the ecosystem need? What do striped bass need? What do whales need? What do ospreys need? Because they're filter feeders. What is they're instrumental in maintaining water quality in places like the Chesapeake Bay. What happens if you take a bunch of those fish out? So we're going to try to have that fishery managed on ecosystem terms so that we take into account what everything else needs, and then figure out based on that how many fish can you take out for this industrial fishing. And we've had a fight going on in the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission for about the past year. We're largely moving toward ecological management, and but it is not easy because you have an entrenched interest here with expensive lobbyists and lawyers, fighting a bunch of us, disorganized recreational anglers. But we're making headway, and I think we're going to make a lot more headway in the next year.
Well, speaking of headway, I think so many of us realize that it just seems that Washington's broken. Hyper-partisan, certainly polarized. How do you break through this and actually accomplish something, getting a bill passed? And we only got about 2 minutes left here. Give us your thoughts.
Well, I mean, listen, I think this is, conservation, hunting, and fishing have always been nonpartisan issues. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Democrat. These should be issues that transcend politics. And I think we've largely been successful making that case. In the last 2 years, almost all the really important things that Congress has gotten accomplished have been in our space. Big new public lands bill that, reauthorized permanently Land and Water Conservation Fund, protected a bunch of different areas, made it very clear that all of our public lands are open for hunting and fishing unless they're specifically closed. We had the Modern Fish Act passed. We had a change in how we pay for forest fires in the West that fundamentally will improve the nation's forest management. We had a deal on Colorado River water management that passed Congress. I mean, these things don't get a ton of attention, but the reason they happened is because in an area of hyper-partisanship, our issues are one that we're trying to make the case that can bring folks together, we can get something accomplished, whereas we're failing in so many other areas.
Look, people are listening out there saying, how do I find out more about TRCP? Tell us about your website. How can they contact you when they want to be engaged with the work you're doing?
Well, listen, we love anybody to get engaged. You can go to trcp.org and check out what we do. If you want to make a donation, we love it because we count on that kind of stuff. But we also just want you to sign up as an activist. So there's something that's happening in your state or, in an area you care about, we can contact you to weigh in because we have about 100,000 folks that have signed up as activists on our site. And those guys are, when something's moving fast in Congress, we put out the call to them, and you guys are the first line of defense.
Final 15 seconds. Give us a closing thought here on today's show.
Hey, listen, I mean, I think that, it's easy to get down on some of this stuff, CWD, pollution, but these are the good old days. I mean, we have great hunting and fishing in this country. We have great access in this country. And let's not take that for granted. Let's engage and make sure that we pass that down to our next generation.
Whit, thanks for being with us today, sharing the role and the achievements of TRCP and so much more. I wish you all the best of luck and good luck when you're up there in the Adirondacks here in the coming weeks. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up right here in Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World. Back next week, same time, 10 Eastern, 9 Central, right here on Rural Radio Sirius 147 with another show that you won't want to miss. And until then, I'm Rob Keck. On behalf of Bass Pro Shops, where your adventure always starts right here, thanks for answering the call. That call to conservation and preserving our rich hunting, fishing, and trapping heritage. We'll see you next week.
This has been Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World, talking all things outdoors, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops, your outdoor leader. Join us next Saturday and every Saturday for more special guests and unique locations, right here on Rural Radio, the agribusiness and Western lifestyle channel.